Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Get Your Control Freak On, where we're going to start to control what your users can and can't do through this thing called group policy. This is some good stuff. In this video, we're going to start off by talking about what it is they're going to be building through this video. Then we're going to talk about what is group policy. I'm going to talk to you quite a bit about the foundations and some of the theory behind group policy, but all along the way, we're going to be bouncing back and forth to machines, illustrating pretty much at every step. And then I want to talk you through setting up 4 of my favorite policies. It's actually more than just 4 settings, keep in mind, but there's 4 things that I like to do when I'm presiding over a network per se, and I'm going to step you through those step by step. All right, so in a nutshell, that's what we're going to be doing. There's a lot of stuff in here, so let's go ahead and let's keep on moving here. We're going to be locking down the desktops for Globomantics. The good news is that the other 23 machines we were waiting on in back order, they finally came in. And we ended up with a new assistant, whose name is Jamie. And Jamie set them all up and joined them all to the domain. But what this means is now that people can actually start coming to work. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that we control what they can do and what they can't do. Now, this is a little more of an art than a science, all right? As you start to get used to working with group policy and really start to see its power and its ability, you'll start to know what you can and can't do. But nevertheless, with this section, before people step into our office, we need to make sure we have some things locked down. You know, we are a securities firm. There's a lot of sensitive information that we deal with on a regular basis, and so we need to make sure there's a few things set up right up ahead of time. So you want to ensure that all desktop wallpaper is the same on every machine. Now, this is a pretty simple, basic kind of everybody does this type of thing. It's a really good idea because this also prevents people from putting weird stuff on their desktop like, naked people. All right, and you all know that when people have naked people on their desktop as their wallpaper, that usually ends up in a sexual harassment lawsuit. At least it does here in the States. So we want to prevent that. Users cannot access the display control panel. We don't want people messing with the screen. Okay, when you give people too many buttons to push, they will push them. And they will end up squirreling something up, and then they'll call you because, well, I did this to my computer, now it doesn't work quite right. Then you figure out what button they pushed, and you think, well, gee, no kidding. You also want to make sure that users cannot install software. Now, user access control on Vista is going to take care of a lot of this for us, just so you know, but we want to make sure that user access control is enabled on all the machines and it can't be turned off. And here's the thing that a lot of system administrators have started to be much more concerned about, and that is this idea of USB sticks and MP3 players and other types of removable storage. I mean, how easy is it for somebody to walk into your network, pop in a USB stick, grab, a couple $100,000 worth of data, and then walk out with it on a little bitty thumb drive? So I'm going to show you how to actually prevent users from doing anything with those altogether. So it's going to be a very, very useful setting for you, I think. But these are the things that we want to be able to ensure that our users cannot do. So in order to make all of this happen, okay, we're going to be using this thing called group policy. And we're going to go back to our Active Directory stuff. We've been working with sharing files and such and folders in the last video, but now we need to go back in Active Directory. We're going to be making all of this stuff happen through this really cool technology called group policy. So let's talk a little bit about what a group policy object is. A group policy object, what it does is it gives you control over what users and computers can and can't do. But they've expanded group policy, especially with Server 2008, and in the next couple of videos we're going to kind of see a bigger picture of what it can do for us. It can do a lot more than just control what users can and can't do. But here's what a group policy object is, kind of in a nutshell. It's an Active Directory object that contains settings that we can configure to control what's happening with users and computers. And there are literally thousands of different settings that can be configured inside of each GPO. And by the way, GPO is how all the cool administrators say it, so if you want to go ahead and adopt that into your vocabulary, feel free. And here's how GPOs are used. They're used with containers. Now, containers, what we're talking about there, we're talking about domains, we're talking about sites, but we're mostly going to be talking about OUs, especially in this particular video. But here's the funny thing. Group policy objects, okay, are not applied directly to groups. Now, groups can play a part, and we'll see that later on in another video in this series, but group policy objects aren't directly applied to groups. So then the question is, why is it called group policy? Okay, and that's one of those things that's probably worth an email to Microsoft, because it really should be like container policy, OU policy, not group policy, because a group is a particular Active Directory object, and group policy does not directly apply to groups. Now, like I said, a little bit later on, I'm going to show you how groups kind of get into the mix with group policy, but group policy is applied to and used with containers, domains, sites, but most of the time organizational units, as we're going to find out in this video. Now, very quickly, what I want to do right now at this point in time is I want to take you over to DC1 via our remote desktop over on our Client 1 machine. I want to show you the console that we're going to be working with all throughout this particular video and the next couple of videos as we explore this whole group policy thing. Alright, so here we are over on our Vista Client 1 machine, where we were working a lot last round. Let's go into DC1 here by opening up our remote desktop shortcut here. And remember, since we saved our credentials, just went ahead and logged us in with them. Alright, so we're going to go here to the server manager on DC1. And let's just do a quick check. We were working with our organizational units last time. Just as a quick review, we have a New York organizational unit, we have New York computers, and New York users. Everything is still intact for those. We still have our groups all intact down here at the bottom. Now remember, our groups are going to come into play with this whole group policy thing later on in the mix. But here's the thing, we're not going to actually be doing our group policy work here. This is where we set up our objects so that we can apply group policy. We're going to go ahead and minimize Server Manager, and let's go to the Start menu. I'm going to go here to the Administrative Tools, and I'm going to go to the GPMC, or the Group Policy Management Console here. We'll get this guy opened up, and this is where we're going to be doing most of our work for this particular video. Alright, now when we initially create our domain, and here's our domain section here underneath the globomatics.com forest. Here in the globomatics.com domain, we have a default domain policy. Now, a default domain policy is always there, it's always created. Now, you could delete it if you want to. You probably don't want to, but if you do, the world doesn't end, just so you know. Okay? All right, so we're going to be taking a look at this default domain policy because it's always there. It's already pre-built for us. So there's nothing that we had to do to actually create it except for create the domain. Now, if I go ahead and I go here to the group policy objects, you see that I have another group policy object living over here, default domain controllers policy. This is for, well, the domain controllers. Go figure, right? We'll talk about the whole domain controllers thing later on. I want to take you into this default domain policy item here real quick, and I just want to kind of show you around a little bit, give you just a kind of the nickel tour. I'm going to right click on it and select Edit. Now this is going to open up a new console called the Group Policy Management Editor, and this allows me to actually edit and make alterations to this particular group policy object. Now notice here we have two sections, computer configuration and user configuration. So we actually have two sides of group policy. For this video, we're going to be sticking with user configuration. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have in here. Here are the policy categories for our user configuration side. We have software settings, and this is if we want to have software installed across the network. This is way cool. We're going to talk about this again in another video. Windows settings, which we might want to dip into here a little bit. We have things like, oh, I don't know, security settings, scripts, remote installation services, folder redirection stuff, all kinds of stuff that we can make alterations with here in Windows settings. What we do most of our work in, let me go ahead and expand this a little bit. We do most of our work in this administrative template section, though. Let's get this guy stretched out a little bit. In the administrative template section, we have the capacity to make alterations to things like the control panel, add and remove programs, And as we select different categories of our policies here, we get the actual settings over here. And if we select one of these settings, it actually provides us with a nice definition and description of what's happening or what can happen with that particular policy. Now, here's the thing. I want to show you real quickly how many settings we do actually have, all right? If I go down here to all settings for the administrative templates section, right here, you'll notice that for the user configuration side of group policy, for all settings, we have 1,332 settings. And seriously, am I going to show you all 1,300 settings? No. No, are you kidding? This course would be like 120 hours long. We still wouldn't be able to get through all of them. And quite honestly, it'd put you to sleep. So we're going to hit, like I said, my 4 favorite policies that I like to make sure are intact when I'm presiding over any given network. The nice thing about it is that you don't have to know all 1,300 policies. There's certain items that you're going to know and you're going to need quickly and easily. There's going to be certain stuff that everybody's going to want and need. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you won't, okay? And that's okay. Remember, you don't have to know all of them, because when you select any one of the policies, it gives you a description of what that policy can do. So if I go here to the standard section, that turns off the description, but I can still get the description though. If I double click on any one of these policies to configure it, and I go to the Explain tab, it tells me exactly what that policy does, basically a duplicate of what was in that extended explanation tab. So I can still get to the explanations and what this particular policy is going to do. Now in the settings, a lot of our settings are either not configured, enabled, or disabled. And different policies are going to have different effects on your users and on your network depending upon if you selected enabled or disabled. So it's one of those things that you're going to have to watch per policy, okay? Now in this instance, when I explained the add programs from Microsoft item, if I disable the setting or do not configure it, so if I pick not configured or disabled, then add programs from Microsoft is available to all users. Now if I enable it, on the other hand, this setting prevents users from using add or remove programs to connect to Windows Update. Okay, so we have a very English side of this. It's very easy to understand for most of these policies. Some of them are a little more convoluted than others, obviously, but nevertheless, most of them are going to be pretty easy to understand. Now again, different group policy settings are going to have different options. So let's see if we can find one here that's a little more interesting. Let's take a look at this package point and print approved servers. Okay. Now for this particular setting, if we enable it, there's another setting here that allows us to add fully qualified server names. So different settings are going to have different parameters that we're going to be able to add in. Now not all of them, but some of them do. Especially when it comes to adding things like servers and adding printers that easily, all kinds of that stuff. I mean, that's all going to have very specific parameters you're going to have to put in for the different settings. Now there's one more thing that I want to talk to you about while we're here, and that is this preferences section. This preferences section, this is a brand new thing with Server 2008. We've never really seen this kind of stuff before in group policy, and it's very, very exciting. We are going to talk about this in another video in this series coming up, but we can do stuff like quickly add printers to everybody's network. We can do stuff like altering the folder options. We can even manage local users and groups if we need a local user. In the Windows settings, we can do things like mapping drives, and here's where we would add files. We can create folders and manage folders. There's just a bunch of way cool stuff that you can do from this preferences section. But again, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself just a little bit. I wanted to mention this to you so that when we come back to this in a couple videos from now, you'll know what it is and it'll be at least a little bit familiar to you. All right, so now we've had just kind of the nickel tour of the group policy management tools. We've taken a look at the group policy management editor. Let's close it, and we will leave open the group policy management console because we're going to come back to this as we start to create our initial policies for Globomantics. But right now, let's go back on over to the slides. I want to talk to you more about the theory and the foundational concepts of group policy. All right, so let's talk about the difference between what we just saw, the domain level policy stuff, and local policy. Now, here's the thing. Every Windows computer, and I mean every Windows computer, even the ones you have at home, have a local group policy component to them. So you can actually control what can be done on that machine and what can be restricted. But here's the kicker, okay? You don't want to have to go around to all of your computers in your domain and configure all the settings manually. I mean, seriously, if you have 500 machines and you're going to use local group policy instead of the domain level policy, now listen, I've known guys who've done it, and you know what? Back when I was a high school teacher and I didn't have full access early on to the domain level policy for my classroom, well, I went around to 30 machines and I configured them by hand using the local group policy. Of course, that took just a stupid amount of time out of my day. Because if any of you are high school teachers or have any experience with high school kids at all, you know that if you set up something that blocks them out of it, they immediately try to go around it. It's just the way it is. It's just the nature of being a high school kid, I think. So I had to keep adding new and more better policies. I had to keep locking more stuff down. Every time I do that, I had to walk around to all 33 of my machines, and it just got really crazy. So when I was actually granted access to administer the policy for my classroom, for those machines and for those users, it made my life so much easier. So here's the thing. You can configure each computer separately using local policy. Because, I mean, really, there's nothing like going around to 25 separate machines and making 26 modifications each one, right? I mean, that's really what our idea of a good time is, huh? Yeah, I don't think so. Because seriously, man, that is just a huge time waste. Now, even though it is a huge time waste, I'm still right now going to take you over to a Vista machine. I at least want to show you how to get into it, because let's say you are faced with a situation where you are not granted access to configure group policy for your particular section of the network. Let's say you are in a high school environment or a nonprofit environment where they don't even have a domain controller. Let's say you're just in a work group environment. So I'm going to go ahead and take you over to the Vista machine. I at least want to show you how to get to the local group policy for each and every machine, okay? All right, well, here we are over on client 2, all right? Didn't take you over to client 1 because, we have the whole remote desktop thing happening on it. So I'm going to show you this on client 2 real quickly. We're going to go ahead and log in real quick onto the client 2 machine. Right now, it wants us to log in as Hank Richardson. Well, Hank Richardson right now does not have access to our local policies. There's two possible logins we could use. We could either use the local administrator logon that we created way back, but if we don't remember it, we might have to use our Supercoach login. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the Supercoach login, because quite honestly, I don't really remember what the administrator password was that I set up for the local administrator right now. But I do know that I can get into it with Supercoach, because the Supercoach, as the domain administrator, is the highest level of authority and is provided the most amount of permissions. So if I go ahead and close our control panel here so I can just kind of get this stuff out of the way. And now I want to show you how to get to that particular group policy for this local machine. I'm going to go to the Start menu, and here in the search box, I'm going to type MMC. Now, by the way, if you're running Windows XP, you would actually go to the Start and you would go to Run. Of course, I don't have Run on this machine, so we're going to jump right over here to the console. Now, this is the MMC, Microsoft Management Console. This is what you'd also see inside of Windows 2000 and 2003. We didn't have that nice pretty server manager back in the old days. It's kind of funny to say that. All right, so I'm going to go here to the File menu and select Add, Remove, Snap-in. And here in the Add, Remove, Snap-in, I'm going to go to the Group Policy Objects Editor here. I'm going to select it. And it's going to ask me, which machine do I want to manage? Well, I want to manage the group policy stuff on the local computer. And I'm just going to tell it Finish. And that's really all there is to it. So I select Group Policy Object. I can double click on it and select Add. Make sure I select local computer, and there it is. So I'm going to tell it OK. And now I'm going to go ahead and expand this here so we can see everything that's happening. Here's the local group policy. You see I have the computer configuration and the user configuration. You will remember that we have the software settings, Windows settings, and the administrative templates, but notice that preferences is missing. Okay, we don't have the preferences section here in local group policy because, well, it's local group policy. I mean, it's the local computer. We're not setting up files and folders and shared maps, shared drive maps, and all the other stuff across several machines. We're only doing it for this one machine. So when I want to lock something down, let's say I want to lock down the control panel. I'm going to go here to the control panel underneath administrative templates. I'm going to use the standard option here so I can see it just a little bit easier. I'm going to prohibit access to the control panel and enable it. Okay, that group policy setting is applied. I'm going to tell it OK. That was really easy, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. But now, since this is local computer policy, you know what I'm going to have to do? I'm going to have to go around to all 25 of my other machines, or I'm sorry, 24, right? I can't do math in my head. All 24 machines, and I have to turn this on. Yeah, that sounds like a way to just really kill an afternoon or an evening, doesn't it? Yeah, and trust me, it is, because I've been there and I've done that. So again, we could do it this way. We could go to every single machine. We could log in as the administrator. We can open up the Microsoft Management Console, also known as the MMC, add in this local policy, snap in to the console, and go in and make these alterations to every single machine. No, we're not going to do that. So let's go back on over to the slides and let's talk a little more about foundational stuff and using group policy at a domain level. So like I said, you can configure each computer separately using the local group policy, the local computer policy. But the other way to do it is the smart way, and that is to configure all of your machines at once from the comfort of your desk using the group policy management console on your domain controller. Now again, just in case you don't have a domain controller, because I've been in situations where I haven't had one. But if we have a domain controller, then there is no good reason why we need to be bouncing from machine to machine to machine, making half a dozen, 2 dozen, or 3 dozen settings on every single machine. That's just wasting your time. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to be able to set up our group policy objects at the domain level and then apply them using Active Directory. Okay, and that way we can control all of our machines at once. Now here's the thing. Right. Now, creating group policy objects, that's a no-brainer. It's very, very easy. We can even use the built-in ones that we have. We can use the domain policy if we like. It's usually not the best place to do a lot of restrictive settings, though. So normally what we do is we create a group policy object. Okay? And this group policy object, then what we have to do is link it to a particular container. Now, most of the time, your group policies are going to be linked to an organizational unit. So if we create a group policy object that controls just the wallpaper, and let's say that we link that group policy object to New York users, then all of the users inside of the New York OU, this NY users organizational unit, would then get that new wallpaper. Now, here's the really cool thing about group policy objects. When you have a group policy object that you want to reuse over and over again, you don't have to recreate it. We can take the same object in this little illustration here. We're going to take the same group policy object that controls wallpaper and not only just link it to New York users, we're also going to link it to the IT users section. So users in the IT users OU will also receive that new wallpaper. So having our group policy objects linked to our containers, and again, usually our containers are going to be organizational units, although there are other containers that we use, gives us the ability to reuse our group policy object over and over and over again. So once we have a good one, it doesn't matter how many organizational units full of users you're going to create, we can continue to use that guy over and over and over again, saving us some work. Now, let me tell you something else here. This whole link, when I was talking to you, links are not difficult to understand, okay? But to kind of throw a little bit of a wrench into the mix, a link is actually an Active Directory object too. So much of the stuff that we're doing in this whole video series is all about Active Directory objects. So not only is the group policy object that controls our wallpaper an Active Directory object, not only is our two organizational units are they Active Directory objects, but also the links that allow us to control the wallpaper, that's an Active Directory object too. Remember that an Active Directory object is nothing more than an entry in a database. However, every entry in our database has a lot of different properties, and when we actually start building our group policy items and we start creating our links to the different OUs that our group policies are going to control, I'm going to show you that our links have a couple of properties that we need to pay attention to, and they're going to be very, very helpful to us when we start doing troubleshooting work. All right, so now we understand that once we have a group policy object, we link it to a container, usually an OU, but not always, because GPOs can be linked at different levels. For example, we can link a GPO at the domain level, and then everything in the domain by default, unless we make any kind of alterations, everything in the domain level is affected. So let's say we decide that everybody is going to have the exact same wallpaper. Well, we could do that in that default domain policy. Remember how we were looking at that earlier? This default domain policy is linked to globalmantics.com as a domain. So that means anything that we set here in this default domain policy will apply to the entire domain. At the organizational unit level, everything in the organizational unit is then affected. Now, this is a nice way to keep a little tighter control on what's happening in your network. When we start breaking out our users into organizational units, it's a lot easier to apply group policy objects. We're going to talk about that again in another video as well. But we can also apply them to sites. Now, we haven't really talked about sites at all in this series. We've talked about them a little bit here and there. We renamed our default first name site to New York and stuff like that. Now, we can apply GPOs also to the site level. You know, we don't normally, all right? I mean, this is not something that we do on a normal everyday basis. Most of the time, we restrict our GPOs to either our domains or our organizational units. But you can apply a group policy object or a GPO to a particular site. Now, whenever we start talking more about sites later on in this video series, it'll probably become a little more clear because we can use sites to control what happens at a physical location type of level. But we're not quite there yet, so we'll talk more about sites later on. We're going to be focusing in on working with the domain and the organizational unit level, more so the organizational unit level. Let me tell you a little bit of a secret about your default domain policy. Your default domain policy right here is almost always the least restrictive. Okay? You're only going to do very basic core kind of stuff here in the default domain policy. You're going to set up your stuff like your password policies. Okay, your desktop wallpaper, okay, maybe you might do that here, but chances are we're actually going to be doing a lot more of our work in the OU level. And remember, since we can create a group policy object and we can link it to several different organizational units down here, well, then we can continue to reuse the same GPO over and over and over again. Now, right now, our structure is pretty basic. But in another video, we're going to start breaking this out into a little more complex structures that will give us a little more ability to apply group policy more efficiently. But we're going to keep this one pretty simple. Okay? So, because really what we're really talking about is what is a group policy object. We're really getting the foundation underneath us here. Now, we know that group policy objects now can be linked at the site level, the OU level, and the domain level. But here's another thing. Group policy has two sides, users and computers. Now, we've talked about seeing this already. Now, here's the thing. While you can configure settings for both sides in any one group policy object, we generally don't. Okay? Why? Because it gets messy and annoying and will give you a headache. Let me guarantee that. Why? Because I've done it. Okay? We separate out our users and computers into separate organizational units. So that way we can apply separate group policy objects to them, okay? So when I'm creating a desktop lockdown policy like what we're going to be building in our exercise here, when I create that for the users, I'm going to be only working in the user configuration section in the user policies section, and I'm going to apply and link this group policy object to an organizational unit that only contains users. And when I'm ready to do stuff for the computers, well, then I'll create a new group policy object, and I'll create computer configuration policies. I'll set those up, and I'll apply that new policy object only to an organizational unit that contains computers. Okay? And again, I've talked to you already about this whole preferences thing. Each side has different preferences that are available. So don't forget about that. Sometimes stuff that you're going to look for might actually be in computer configuration rather than in user configuration. But in just a little bit, I'm going to show you how to find policies a little faster and a little easier, okay? All right, now, we have a basic core understanding, at least I think so. At least we have the foundational knowledge of group policy objects. Here's another thing, okay? When you're using group policy, it's applied in a very specific order. And here's that order. First of all, whatever is on the local computer policy happens first, okay? So let's say that on the local computer policy, we've decided that no users can put anything onto the desktop. Okay, well then they're locked out of the desktop. That's it. Doesn't matter what happens down the line here. Nope, doesn't matter one bit. If the local computer policy says, okay, I'm denying access to this particular thing, then access is denied to that particular thing. However, here's the deal. We generally don't mess with local computer policy. Why? Because we would have to go around to every single machine and set it. And all I can say is no. No, we're not going to do that, right? Then whatever site policy is applied at the site is applied. But again, we generally don't apply policies to sites either. Okay? You know, there's going to be rare occasions where you might want to, but most of the time, you're not going to do it. Then whatever policy is running at the domain level, remember that default domain policy? Then it gets applied, and then the organizational unit policy gets applied. So then again, this is where we're going to be doing most of our work in this particular video series, because this is where you're going to be doing most of your work in real life, although you might be doing some stuff at a domain policy level as well. Here's a real easy way for you to remember this. LSDOU, and yes, there's kind of a 60s reference hidden in this particular item here, but you know, it's just kind of an easy way to remember it. You know, LSDOU, in terms of how group policy and the order in which they get applied to a user or a computer. Also, here's something else that I would like for you to remember. Well, let's say you have two different group policy objects. Let's say that one group policy object happens to be running here at the site level and one happens to be running at the OU level. Well, guess what? The last one wins. Okay? Generally speaking, the last group policy that's applied is the one that wins. So if you have conflicting policies, if one says one thing and one says the other, the last one wins, and the last one is always the OU policy. All right, so here we go. We've talked a lot about this theory stuff, and it's kind of heady, so let's kind of really break this down. Let's get into the core level where the rubber really meets the road for this. We need to ensure that our user accounts are restricted in the following fashions. This is the same thing we talked about earlier. All desktop is the same on every machine and cannot be changed. Remember, we don't want people putting up weird pictures or naked people on the desktop, right? We want to make sure that users cannot access the display control panel. We're going to ensure that users cannot install software and that they cannot attach removable drives like USB sticks, MP3 players, cameras, whatever, any kind of removable storage media. We want to ensure that they cannot attach. Now, as administrators, don't worry about it. If you log in as the administrator, you can always attach stuff unless you restrict yourself for some weird reason. But for the users, we want to ensure that those guys can't do that. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to be creating a single group policy object to start off with. We're going to remember we're going to kind of try to keep it as simple as we can. We're going to be applying all of these settings on the user side. Okay. Then we're going to be linking the group policy object that we're going to create to the NY users organizational unit. And then after we've got it set up, we're going to test out this group policy object with Elbinga. Remember Elbinga from the other video? So we're going to use his account, and we're going to see if all of this works. So let's go ahead and let's move on over back to DC1 via our remote desktop on our Vista Client 1, and let's get this started. All right, so here we are over on the Vista Client 1, and of course we are still remote desktoped into New York DC1, and the Group Policy Management Console is still open, just like we left it here. And so we're going to go ahead and start creating that initial group policy object, and we're going to add in those policies that we just talked about. Now, we're going to be applying the group policy object here to the New York users group, OU. So really all of the users inside of our NY users are going to be affected by this policy. And that also includes Hank Richardson, so kind of keep that in the back of your mind until the next video, okay? We're going to right-click on NY users, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a GPO in this domain and link it here. Remember, we can create GPOs, but they have to be linked. Now, Server 2008 gives us a little bit of a helping hand and creates and links it at the same time. So let's go ahead and let's do that here. Let's go ahead and select Create, and we're going to call this guy Desktop Lockdown. Now, notice here where it says Source Starter GPO, and it says None. I'm going to go ahead and tell us OK. I want to talk to you just a second here about GPOs and kind of take a short little tangent. A starter GPO is basically a group policy object that you create previously. Let's say that there's settings that you want to have applied to all machines or all computers. You don't have to go back and reset those 20 settings over and over and over again. Well, you can create a starter GPO and just simply make copies of it. You know, it's kind of a nice little feature. This is new to Server 2008, by the way, so if you've taken a look at this thing in 2000, 2003, notice that this was not here, right? We're not going to concern ourselves right now really with the starter GPO stuff. We're just going to go and continue to work with our desktop lockdown GPO. Now you see here when I clicked on it, it tells me that I have selected a link to a group policy object. So what I'm seeing right here underneath NY users is not the actual group policy, it's just the link. Remember I told you that a link is also an Active Directory object, right? I'm going to go ahead and tell this message OK, and it's going to give me some statistics and some information about the GPO over here on this side. First of all, it's going to tell me what the location of this particular link is. It's going to give me the details of this particular link and the settings that are part of the desktop lockdown policy. Now, right now, we haven't done anything except for create it. Oh, looks like we got a little bit of a warning here. Content within this application coming from the website about security MMC, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you know what? We're going to go ahead and we're going to add this item to our trusted zones. Remember, when we're working with server, most of the time we'll keep Internet Explorer kind of locked down so it's not going to places and grabbing a hold of drive-by downloads or any nasty elements as well. So I'm going to go ahead and add this website to the zone and tell it to close. That'll be fine, because what you're actually seeing here is actually a web page, just so you know. So right now you see that there's no settings defined at all because it's well, we haven't done anything. So also there's a delegation tab, and we're going to come back to this tab. This is going to play a much needed role in another video, but we'll deal with that when we come to it, all right? So let's go back over here to the desktop lockdown, and let's actually make some alterations to it. Let's actually add some settings in here. We need to right-click on the link. And by the way, our actual desktop policy object lives here in the group policy objects folder. Okay, so here's the desktop lockdown, and this is kind of nice because when you select the actual group policy object, you see where it's actually linked to. So if I link desktop lockdown to 2 or 3 different organizational units, I can see what organizational units I have linked it to here in this particular section. All right, so back over here to desktop lockdown. Again, it's telling me I've selected a link. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to right click it and select edit. Now, even though I'm selecting the link and selected edit on the link, it's still going to open up the desktop lockdown policy object. All right, so now remember, we're going to be working strictly with the user side of the desktop lockdown policy for this particular video. We're not going to worry about the computer configuration side. In this video, we'll worry about that one in another video, okay, in this same series. So we're going to go ahead and here go to the policies section. And the items that we're going to start looking at, we want to concern ourselves with the desktop wallpaper initially, okay? So here in the policies, we're going to be looking under the administrative template section. This is where most of your policy setting and most of your policy work is actually going to be happening. Now, there's a couple of different ways to get to a variety of different policies. First of all, I want to take you here to all settings. I like this. Okay? This all settings section, I'm going to go ahead and go to standard here. I don't really care to see this extended section because I know what I'm looking for. And remember, you can always get to the explanations by double clicking on any one of the policy setting objects and going to the explain section, right? When I look here at all settings, I have 1,332 unique settings for the user side for the configuration. Now, I could scroll through all 1,300 and some odd settings, but I have better things to do with my time, right? So here's what I want to do. We can actually filter out for particular topics that we're looking for. First of all, I'm going to turn on this filter, okay? And now I'm going to go here to the view menu, and you see that the filter is on, but I'm going to go here to filter options. Now, this is the thing that I'm going to recommend that you use the most often. All right. First of all, enable keyword filter should be checkmarked, and right now it's filtering for the word removable because I was messing around with this earlier. Now I'm going to do a filter for desktop. Okay, let's see what we come up with here. I'm going to tell it OK, and it's going to refilter for items that are specifically for the desktop or have desktop in the titles at the very least. So I don't have nearly as many policies to look through. So I mean that's a little bit of an advantage. Desktop wallpaper. Hey, here we go. This is a good start. Here in the desktop wallpaper properties, this is where I can actually set a specific wallpaper for all of my users. Now right now you see it's not configured. And you notice here that when I do enable this policy, I have additional parameters that I can specify like we were talking about just a little while ago. Now, the wallpaper name, okay, this is pretty critical. If we're going to enable this policy, which, by the way, we are, because remember, we want the same desktop wallpaper on all of the machines, or at least all of our user machines anyway, we need to specify where that wallpaper lives, and that's what we need to put here in the wallpaper name. The easiest way to handle this is to create a shared folder out on a particular server, probably our file server on Mem1 in this case for Globomantics. And then we can just put in the share address into it, so that way it will actually pull the wallpaper off of that shared folder. Now let me tell you an advantage to this. If you do a shared folder with one wallpaper, let's say that you want to change the wallpaper 6 months from now or 2 weeks from now or even tomorrow, all you have to do is replace that one file. Yeah, it is pretty cool. So you know what? That's what we're going to do right now. We're going to go over to Mem1 and we're going to create a shared folder for our wallpaper. And you know what? I've cheated a little bit because I have created a Globomantics wallpaper to use, and so we're going to actually take that wallpaper, throw it into a shared folder so that way we can access it here and apply that wallpaper on all of our machines. So let's go ahead and go on over there. And you know what? I got to tell you, I think I'm really tired of just bouncing on over to the virtual machine, so let's go ahead and let's set up a remote desktop shortcut to it. Let's go ahead and minimize this remote desktop, and we're back here on the desktop of our Vista Client 1. I'm going to go down here to the Start menu and let's do the remote desktop connection thing. Let's go to the options here and let's see here. Looks like I've already tested this out to make sure we can get there. And so we're going to go here to the experience and make sure it's set to LAN. That's good. And so we're going to go ahead and allow us to save credentials here. And let's go ahead and let's save. And let's go ahead and let's save this guy to our desktop. And we'll name him Mem1. That looks good. And we'll save it out here. There we go. There he is. And we'll go ahead and cancel this. Let's test this guy out. We'll double click on him. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off this whole warning thing. I know where I'm connecting to, so we'll click on connect. And now we're going to be logging in as a SuperCoach account, of course. And we'll go ahead and also remember the credentials. So that way next time I just have to double click on it and jump directly over to Mem1. Alright, so here we are in Mem1, and here is the Globomantics wallpaper that I created. I've went ahead and posted it to the desktop. It's pretty simple. I have the logo here in the upper right hand corner. Nothing really extravagant. I'm going to go ahead and close this guy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the start menu and to the computer. And we're going to go to, what do you think? Let's do ops, right? We'll go to the ops folder, or the ops volume, I should say. And let's go ahead and make a new folder here. And we'll just call it wallpaper, so it's real easy to remember. I'll make it lowercase. And let's go ahead and share this folder as well. Right now it's just shared to SuperCoach. So let's go ahead and let's add in here the domain users. All right. And a lot of folks, what they'll do is they'll share something to everyone. This is not a very good idea. Right? When you share something to everyone, that literally means everyone. And that means people who are not necessarily part of your network. So we'll go ahead and not do everyone. Okay. We're going to keep this semi-secure and make domain users have read-only permission to this folder. Now this is share level permissions, remember. So anything that we put into this folder will inherit that share level permission. Now we could do the whole NTFS thing, but there's no reason to, because basically we want all the domain users, all of our users, to be able to read this folder and grab the wallpaper so that our desktops are uniform across the enterprise, okay? All right, so here's the path //ny-mem1-2k8/wallpaper. Right? It's pretty simple. All right, we'll tell it done. And so now let's go ahead and let's shrink this down just a little bit so we can actually get to the wallpaper on the desktop here. I'll double click on the wallpaper and let's drag and drop this guy real quick. And we'll delete the copy hanging out here on the desktop. That's fine. So now our Globomantics wallpaper is hanging out here. Now it's kind of a long name, and since I want to make it as easy as possible to get to, I'm going to do a quick renaming of this guy. I'm going to right click on him and we'll select rename, and I'm just going to call it GBWP. So it's short. And the actual name of this file, notice that this is just a bitmap image. I'm going to right click on it and go into its properties. The actual name is gbwp.bmp. Okay, so it's gbwp for Globomantics wallpaper.bmp. Right, because we're going to need to put in that exact address and the exact file name over on our group policy object. So let's go ahead and let's minimize our New York Mem1 desktop. And let's go ahead and let's go back to our DC1 remote desktop. Look how easy that is. Once you have your remote desktop set up, you can bounce back and forth. You can have multiple remote desktop sessions open at once nowadays. All right, let's see here. Let's go back over here to our group policy editor and let's go back to the desktop wallpaper and we will enable it. And now we're going to put in our wallpaper name //ny-mem1-2k8/wallpaper /gbwp for Globomantics wallpaper.bmp. That's the file name, right? We'll have the wallpaper center on every single desktop. Now this, just so you know, this particular wallpaper is actually 800 by 600 because that's the resolution that all of our machines are in. Now most desktops are at least 1024 by 768, so make sure your wallpaper is at least that size or larger depending upon the standard display of what you have running in your shop, okay? All right, so we go ahead and we'll enable this wallpaper. So we've started with the first item on our hit parade. We've specified the desktop wallpaper, and that's neat. But here's the thing. We're not preventing our users at this point from changing the wallpaper. That's a little more rascally. So here's what we're going to do. Right now I'm going to turn this filter off because you've seen how the filter works now, right? You can go ahead and filter out by whatever topic that you're looking for in the group policy settings. But they've also categorized stuff pretty well over here in the tree view. So I'm going to go here into the desktop underneath administrative templates. And we're going to set up a few items over here. First of all, let's go directly into the desktop folder. Desktop wallpaper, this is its original home. Okay, so we've already turned that guy on, so we're all good for that. Next, I want to take a look here at this prohibit changes item. Now this looks interesting. Let's go ahead and double click on it and open it up. And let's go into the explain tab. This prevents the user from enabling or disabling active desktop or changing the active desktop configuration. Now, active desktop is one of those ways that our users could still get into the desktop and make changes. So what we're going to do is we are going to turn it off. All right, so we're going to enable this policy. Now look down here at the bottom. See where it says supported on? This policy is supported on Windows Server 2003, Windows XP, and something else. Let's go back here to the explain. Nope, looks like we're not seeing it there either. Let's go ahead and just tell it OK. And let's go to the extended tab here. Here we go. Here's the operating systems that this prohibit changes are actually going to work on. So Server 2003, Windows XP, Windows 2000. What's missing? Yeah, Vista. We're going to have a bunch of Vista clients. This is a brand new shop. We're not going to have these older operating systems. So for right now, you know what? We don't have to turn this guy on. We're going to go ahead and let's just disable this guy, or let's leave it not configured because it's not going to make any difference to our machines. All right, so we're going to be looking for policy settings that are going to be affecting Vista. All right, so let's go back over here to the extended. Let's take a look here. No, I'm not seeing it, not seeing it, not seeing it, not seeing it. At least Windows 2000. Okay, well, that's good. Prohibit adding items. This one's only for 2003, XP, and Windows 2000. So at least Windows 2000, that means it will operate on Vista. So we're going to be A-OK there. All right, so let's go now into the control panel settings because there's some more stuff in here that's going to be of more interest to us. So I'm going to expand control panel and go here to the display tab. Here in the display tab, first of all, remember how we said we want to make sure that our users cannot change stuff? So here's what we're going to do. First of all, we're going to remove the display options in the control panel altogether. So our users aren't even going to be able to see the control panel whatsoever. And again, we can take a look at the quick explanation. Now, this disables the display option, but there's still ways that people can get around it. All right, so there's also one in here, prohibit access to the control panel, that will also help to prevent our users from getting into it any which way possible. Now, most of the time, if a setting is not available for people to click on, they generally won't click on it. However, in every place I've ever worked at, there's always that one guy or one gal who's taken a few classes and they know how to get around a lot of this group policy stuff. So we might also want to go ahead and lock them out of the control panel altogether. That may or may not be a good idea depending upon what you want users to be able to do and what you want them to be able to accomplish. And I want you to kind of keep something in mind as we go through all of this stuff. Let's go ahead and let's just leave this enabled and tell it OK. Everything that you turn off for the users means more stuff for you to do when a user needs that particular function. Okay? So if you turn off the ability for users to actually get into the control panel altogether, and by the way, that's over here underneath control panel, right? If we prohibit access to the control panel and our users need something in the control panel to do something that is related to their work, that means you or a member of your staff have to go over to that machine, log off the user, and log on with an account that is exempt from this policy. So something that you want to keep in mind, okay? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave this disabled or not configured, really. So because I'm thinking, this may or may not be a good idea for our initial site. Because remember, you can always come back and turn these back on. All right. So if you find that a user or a bunch of users are getting into the control panel doing stuff that you don't want them to be doing, you can always come back and turn this guy back on. All right. So I'm going to go back to the display tab. And here's what I really want to do. I want to prevent them from changing the wallpaper. Right? And again, it says at least Windows 2000, which means Vista is going to be included in this particular setting. So I'm going to prevent my user from changing the wallpaper properties by enabling this policy. Let's go to the explanation tab. Some of these settings rely on other settings in this particular object. So one of those things that you really need to, as you're setting this up, never skip the explanation tab, okay? It's always going to be a good idea for you to know exactly what this thing is going to do, and if there's anything else that this particular setting relies upon. Right here, you see, no, you must also enable the desktop wallpaper setting to prevent users from changing the desktop wallpaper. Well, fortunately, we've already done that, right? So we have met the requirements for this particular policy. So our users will not be able to change it, and we have set the appropriate policy for the desktop wallpaper. Take a look at this here too. To remove the desktop tab, might be something we should probably do. In order to make sure that our users can't get to the desktop, we might want to change this one as well. Let's go ahead and tell it okay. Let's see if we can find this guy here. Hide desktop tab. The desktop tab just basically allows users to go into the desktop settings, and we're going to go ahead and enable it. We're going to make sure that their desktop tab is also gone. So anytime that they might want to try another workaround, the desktop tab is still gone. So we're kind of doing maybe a little more than what we need to, but in the realm of locking down your desktops, it's better to be safer than sorry, because if it ever causes you any problems, I want you to remember you can always come in here and turn it off. Group policy is very flexible in that fashion. All right, so let's click here on the standard tab, and let's see here. We have enabled remove display in the control panel altogether. We have hidden the desktop tab. We have prevented our users from changing wallpaper. So with this particular setting, remember how I said we were setting up my favorite 4 settings, okay? Well, in order to accomplish this one task, we had to enable several different settings in this policy object. So I want you to keep that in mind. In order to perform one function, you may have to turn on several different policies in order to make that happen, because remember, some policies rely, or at least should say, some settings rely on other settings. All right, so we've got this one down. Next, let's take a look at this whole being able to prevent them from installing software. So let's go here to add or remove programs. Now, user access control, just so you know, on Vista will prevent a lot of this whole software installation thing. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove the add or remove programs altogether, just to prevent our users from using that particular item. Let's say that somebody gets a hold of administrative credentials and they're able to go in and use add or remove programs. They can still use it because it's still available. In Vista, in order to install, you have to have administrative credentials. Otherwise, you can't install anything. So just again, this is just more of a better to be safer than sorrier type of thing. Also, adding and removing the Windows components. Let's go ahead and let's enable that too, to lock them out of that one. Add a program from CD or floppy disk. We'll enable that. Programs from Microsoft. Let's go ahead and enable that one. Adding programs from the network, we might want to hang on to that one. That might be something that might come into play later on for us. So really what I'm doing for a lot of these is I'm turning them on just more of as a precaution in case someone finds a way around one of the settings. And trust me, I have worked with high school kids long enough to know that they will find a way. If there is a way, I have seen high school kids, inner city high school kids, go through Microsoft's support pages and TechNet pages and a variety of other sites as well, trying to find a way around a particular setting. All right, so we have initially prevented folks from at least finding and seeing ways to install applications. You know what? Let's go to the all settings and let's do a quick filter and let's see if there's any others that we might want to turn on as well here. We'll go to the filter options and let's do a quick filter for install. And if we go in here to add or remove programs, looks like some of these have already been in place. Printers, programs. Basically, I'm just going to do a quick look through to see if there's any other settings that I might have missed. Because again, there's what, 1,300 settings, right? So this is something that we might want to stop and look at. Hey, let's take a look at this driver installation thing. I'm going to open up this code signing for drivers. This is going to be one of those things that are going to prevent people from installing their own hardware. This might not be a bad idea too, especially if the hardware does not come with what we call Windows signed drivers. A Windows signed driver basically just means that that particular software driver for a hardware device has been tested by Microsoft and has proved to be A-OK to work with this particular operating system. So I'm going to go ahead and enable this policy here, and I'm going to go ahead and block users from installing any kind of hardware that might have a driver that is not Windows tested. Okay? All right, so we'll tell that guy OK. Let's see, Windows components and all settings here. Here we go. Here's a bunch of them that we should take a look at. Let's see if there's anything in here that's really critical. Always install with elevated privileges. Let's take a look at that one. And you'll see here that this particular setting must be set for the machine, i.e. the computer, and the user to be enforced. So if we actually want to use or deny this one, we would actually have to go over here to the computer configuration section, set it there as well as here, right? I'm not going to worry about this one because this one is, if I go to the explanation tab, if I disable or the setting or do not configure it, the system applies the current user's permissions when it installs programs that a system administrator does not distribute or offer. All right, well that's fine because what we're doing is we're going to lock them out of all that anyway. Let's keep on scrolling down here to see anything else. Prevent removable media source for any install. Let's go ahead and configure that one. This will ensure that our users can't bring in, say, like an SD card or a USB stick and install from that. All right, so we'll tell that OK. In just a minute, I'm going to show you how to prevent access to any kind of removable media, but this one, again, is just one of those safer than sorrier types of things. All right, so we're looking pretty good here. I'm not seeing any other policy settings that are going to probably make that much of a difference. Here's something that I want to talk to you about. These two on top, the install on demand using Internet Explorer. Let's open this guy up and let's hit the explanation. There is a capability to install applications from inside of Windows Explorer. Stuff like fonts, stuff like Flash Player, stuff like that. This might be something that's good to go ahead and leave on because Flash Player and stuff that happens inside of Internet Explorer most of the time is going to be okay. Spyware and antivirus software should take care of any nasty drive-by downloads that might occur. This one I'm going to go ahead and leave it not configured. I'm not going to disable the policy because it's really not that critical. All right, so let's go ahead and let's turn off the filter now. And there's one more thing that I want to set up here with you while we're working on this. Is that whole removable drive, removable device and removable storage stuff. It's hiding out here underneath the system category, underneath the administrative templates. I'm going to scroll down here just a second and go into the removable storage access. Now this is becoming more and more of an issue with users and for system administrators because folks can walk in with a USB stick or any other type of removable media, plug it into the machine, and then download a bunch of files and then walk off with it. So that can be problematic. What we're going to do is we're going to be a little more secure with this one. For all removable storage classes, we're going to deny all access. Let's open that guy up. And you see here that this is supported only on Vista. So here's the deal. Somebody walks in with a XP machine. Well, this particular policy is not going to apply to them. One of those things I really need you to keep in the back of your head, okay, is that if you set up a whole bunch of Vista policies, that's great for your particular machines, but if somebody walks in with an XP machine and you join it to the domain, those policies will not necessarily flow down. Some of them will, some of them won't. It depends upon which setting or which operating system that particular setting needs to operate. All right, so we're going to go ahead and enable this. Let's look at the explanation tab here. Configure access to all removable storage classes. This policy takes precedence over any individual removable storage policy. If you enable this policy setting, no access is allowed to any removable storage class. Okay, well that's neat. We'll tell it okay. And you notice here that there are additional removable storage class items in here like the CDs, DVDs, floppy drives, removable disks, tape drives, WPD devices. Those are your MP3 players. Okay, And MP3 players can cause a problem because they are considered a storage medium, and you can actually drag and drop files just straight to like a Microsoft Zune or any number of other MP3 players that are out there available. So we're just going to deny access to all of them. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and just put a blanket code on this. And remember, if this gives you problems and we say, all right, well, this is giving me a problem with one particular device that everyone needs, then you might have to come back, turn this particular policy on, and then deny specific individual classes. So let's say that all removable storage is not working for you because you need CD and DVD access. Well, then we can turn everything else off by enabling all the rest of these policies and leave these not configured. All right, so we've done a pretty good job here. We have enabled a particular wallpaper. We've made sure that users cannot change that wallpaper. We have denied access to removable storage classes. We've also denied access to the display control panel. So I think all of our group policy settings are enabled. Tell you what, let me go here to all settings real quick and let me show you how you can figure out exactly and very quickly which settings you've turned on. In the all settings tab, you can go here to the state item. You can sort for the state, and you'll see here are all of the items that we have turned on. And again, I know I told you we were going to be applying 4 of my favorite settings. Well, these 4 settings require more than 4 items here. And some of these I kind of saw, hey, this looks like fun. Let's go ahead and turn that on just to be safer than sorrier. But again, if it's going to give you problems, we can go back and turn it off. All right, so let's go ahead and close out of our group policy management editor. And notice I didn't have to click on a save button or anything. And there's a reason for that. Yep, somehow we ended up over here in the DNS server section. Let's go ahead and turn that one off. And let's go back here to our group policy management. Learn which button to turn on, coach. All right, so we're back here in the group policy management. We have edited desktop lockdown. And now if I go here to the settings for this particular GPO, I'm going to go ahead and press the F5 key to refresh this one. And there we go. All right, so now I can click on the show and I can see exactly which components are turned on. And that's kind of nifty. All right, so we can go through here and see exactly which particular settings we have applied in this one particular group policy object. All right, let's click here on the scope tab, and this particular group policy object is linked to New York users or NY users. So this is A-OK. This is looking pretty good. Now, by the way, I wanted to show you this real quick. I could right click on this link and I could uncheck link enabled. Let's say that this group policy object is really giving me a lot of headaches, especially during testing. And by the way, always test your group policy stuff before you roll it out to your entire enterprise. Otherwise, you're going to make people angry and bad things can happen. But if I disable the link, because remember, a link is an Active Directory object too. If I disable the link, then this group policy object does not currently apply to the particular organizational unit. Right? We want to make sure that link is enabled, and you'll notice here that that little guy kind of grays out and then comes back when you enable it. You can always take a look at the scope tab and see if that link is enabled or not. All right, so our desktop lockdown policy is created. Our settings are intact. Our guy is linked. And so now what's next? Yep, we got to test it out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to CL2, our second Vista client. We're going to log in as LBinga, and we're going to see if all of the settings that we have enabled apply to LBinga, because LBinga is, he does live in NY users. I'm going to go over here to the server manager. Let's just double check to make sure. Click here in the server manager on NY users, and let's scroll down here. Where is LBinga? LBinga, where are you? All right, so there's LBinga, and he is in the NY users organizational unit. So that means, let's go back over to group policy management. LBinga's account should be affected by this desktop lockdown. All right, tell it okay. So let's try it out. All right, so here we are back on client 2, our Vista client, And here's the console. We were looking at the local computer policy. We didn't turn anything on here, so let's go ahead and close this out. And who's logged in right now? Oh, Supercoach is. Okay, well, let's go ahead and let's log off as Supercoach. And we're going to log back in as Elbinga. And as soon as we log back in as Elbinga, we should be able to see all of the settings applied. Oops, I need to switch the user, don't I? There we go. Other user, Elbinga. All right, we'll log in here. And in just a second here, we should be presented with all right. Well, our desktop wallpaper didn't show through. That's not very good. Let's right click and let's see if we can get to the settings. Nope. Okay, well that one worked. All right, so we're okay there. Let's go to the start menu and let's go to the control panel, and oh gee, look, there is no control panel. Yep, that's right. We turned it off, didn't we? So we're a-okay for that one. That one seemed to work as well. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually try to install actually insert a USB stick, and I'm physically doing that here. I know you can't really see that, but I'm trying to put in a USB stick, and let's go to the start menu and go to computer. Let's see if I can see it. I'm going to hit the F5 key, and I've got nothing. All right, well, that's good. So that worked too. What will happen if I go to uninstall or change a program here? Well, I can still get to this. So the Windows features is still there. So this one didn't work either. We got some problems here. We got to go back and get these particular policies fixed. Now, before we do that, there is another tool that I want to introduce you to here real quick, and that is a command line option called GP Update /force. Now, I can actually access GP Update from here, from Elbinga's account, actually. So if I do GP Update and hit the Enter key, it's actually going to try to update the policy for me and see if we can actually get those new policy settings downloaded from our domain controller. Okay, the user policy update has completed successfully. That's good. And the computer policy update, which I know we didn't do anything with, right, has completed successfully. So let's go ahead and let's exit out of that, and let's go ahead and log off, and let's log back on. We may even have to do a restart. Let's find out. All right, and we'll try this one more time here. Hey, there we go. All right, so looks like our policy did work that time. Our desktop wallpaper has been applied. Fantastic. So we needed to do that quick GP update. Now, I just did it on this machine. So here's another trick that I want to teach to you as well. Let's move back on over to DC1, and I want to tell you one more command that I should have ran before I moved over here to Client 2, but I want you to see what we had to do if in case our group policies didn't apply the first time, because you know what, that happens a lot. So, but since our GP update stuff did work, let's go ahead and let's try to get to our control panel again. Nope, it's still gone. If I go back here to computer and I go to uninstall or change a program, yeah, that one's not working either really. So we need to kind of get rid of this one. Notice that install is not here though. Well, that's good. So at least part of our installation policy is working a-okay. Chances are what I really should do is I should go back to that group policy management editor, and I should go through and find additional policies to get rid of this thing altogether. Okay? That'll be your homework, all right? Because I think you're seeing how group policy works now. We've applied several different settings, and remember, this is just for the user. So the really nice thing is no matter what computer our user logs into, let's say that Elbinga, let's say his computer just completely crashes one day, and so you happen to have a spare machine, you set it up, you join it to the domain, and Elbinga logs into it. Well, Elbinga should see, as soon as he logs into it, this particular desktop, and he should not have access to the display panel settings or any of that stuff, no matter which machine he goes to. All right, so we're looking pretty good. Let's bounce back on over to DC1. Let me teach you one more trick, and we will wrap this one up. All right, so I'm back over here on NYDC1. I'm going to go ahead and close my Group Policy Management console. And I'm going to show you one more trick here. Let's do a quick CLS. You notice I'm in the command prompt. Here is the quick trick that I should have ran as soon as I created my group policy. It's again GP update, which is group policy update, /force. Now what this little command is going to do, I'll just press the enter key, is it's going to push down the policy to all machines and all users that are affected by it in those particular OUs. Now that means if you have 20 new policy objects set up and you've applied them to 12 different OUs, those group policy objects and those settings are going to be pushed down over the network, so it's going to be sucking bandwidth. All right. So when you're doing GP update /force, make sure it's not in the middle of the day, especially if you have a lot of group policy stuff running in your Active Directory, because it's all going to be pushed down the wires and it's going to take up some bandwidth. So you might end up seeing a little bit of network slowdown. So run GP update usually at the beginning of your day or at the end of your day before everyone is logged in. Okay? All right, so our user policy updates are completed successfully. This should kind of be just one of those things you need to get into kind of an automatic mindset about, because GP update /force will prevent any weirdness from, or at least I should say, prevent more weirdness from happening with a group policy. Group policy is kind of more an art than a science, and it's going to take you a while to figure out which policies are going to work for your network. The ones that I've shown you are pretty standard and they're not really going to cause much of an issue. All right, so we know that our group policy works. I've shown you how to set it up. So let's go ahead and let's do a wrap up of this video and let's move on to the next one. All right, so let's go ahead and start our wrap up with a vocabulary review here real quick. A group policy object, an Active Directory object that allows you, the administrator, to control what users can do on computers via settings, or sometimes also known as policies. And you know what? Don't be confused when folks use the word policies or settings, okay? When we're talking about settings or policies, we're talking about those items inside a group policy object. A lot of times also you hear people talk about GPOs. You'll see them in a book as referenced GPO. Just an alias, okay? It stands for Group Policy Object. A link, remember that a link is an Active Directory object that allows a GPO, Group Policy Object, to affect a particular container. Remember, our containers are usually domains or just organizational units. LSDOU, right? The processing order in which GPOs are applied. Remember, we always start off with the local computer policy, and then we go to the site policy gets applied next, but usually in most networks, these two are generally not set up in a lot of places. Even though we can do local computer policy, we can do policies on sites, we generally only apply group policy objects to domains and to organizational units. Now again, you might work for the one company that does both local computer policy and site policy. And if so, good for you. But generally, it's a little bit of overkill, and there's other ways to break down group policy into more specific applications. But we'll talk about those in the coming videos, okay? GPMC, just an acronym that a lot of times you'll hear folks say or read about it in books. Just stands for Group Policy Management Console, and that's just where we did all of our group policy work, right? The local computer policy. Remember that the local computer policy is just a group policy object that applies only to a local computer and only affects that one computer. Now remember that we generally don't do a lot of local group policy on individual computers because we would have to set those up on every single machine. If you have 500 machines in your network, are you going to go to all 500 machines? I think not. I mean, I guess you can, but you don't need to, right? Because we can do all this work at the domain level and at the OU level. All right, so after watching this video, you should be able to create and link a group policy object to an OU. And we did that. We did that all in one fell swoop, didn't we? We just created and linked it by doing a quick right-click on the OU in the Group Policy Management console. You should be able to apply settings in a GPO to lock down the user's ability to do stuff like change the desktop, We set the wallpaper, make sure the user can't change it right. We lock down their ability to even use the display control panel altogether. So they can't even see it or reach it. Also, we reduce their ability to attach a USB drive or other removable storage device. And also, we prevented their ability to install software. We still have the ability to uninstall software, right? So there are some other policies in there that we probably should have messed with. Also, remember that when it comes to installing software, that user account control in Vista actually prevents user class accounts from installing software altogether. All right, but that's a Vista lesson and not a Server 2008 lesson. There's another section in the computer configuration side of the policy, by the way, I'm going to show to you in the upcoming videos that will further lock this down for UAC for Vista. So I'll show those to you in the coming videos. But anyway, you should be able to also describe the order in which group policies are processed. And remember that it starts with a local group policy, the local computer policy, the site policy, the domain policy, then the OU policy. And all these things are cumulative and apply their policies. So if there's a conflicting policy, remember, usually the last one wins. Also, you should be able to describe which containers you can link a GPO to. Remember that you can link a group policy object to the domain level, the OU level, but also the site level, which we generally don't do. All right, friends. Well, hey, that wraps up this particular video. We're going to keep talking about more group policy stuff in the next one, because in the next video, we're going to talk about why Hank just got really, really mad and would like to fire you for it. So you have to do something really, really fast in order to make him happy. So stay tuned. See me in the next video, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about.